Hey guys, tonight we slip into a world where the god of wine himself swaps wild frenzy for a quiet garden party. Imagine yourself stepping into a softly lit garden, leaves rustling gently in a cool evening breeze, and the faintest clink of delicate cups filled with honeyed wine. No roaring crowds, no madness, just calm, curated moments shared among a few thoughtful friends under the twinkling stars. Sounds oddly peaceful for Dionysus, right? The ancient Greek god, more famously known for frenzied celebrations and ecstatic dance. But tonight, we explore why Dionysus loved these subtle social gatherings, where laughter was hushed and spirits lifted without uproar. You probably won't survive this without nodding off at least once, because quiet parties with a god known for chaos, it's a paradox wrapped in grapevines. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, don't forget to post your location and local time in the comments, because I want to know who's joining this peaceful stroll through history's quieter side. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge along a narrow garden path, damp earth underfoot, surrounded by vines heavy with ripening grapes and olive trees whispering above. This is no ordinary party scene. Dionysus's quieter gatherings weren't about the loud clamor or wild abandon you might expect. Instead, they unfolded like carefully crafted symphonies, a delicate balance of nature companionship and restrained celebration. It's a side of the god you won't find in the usual stories of drunken madness and chaotic revelry. Historians still argue whether these calm garden parties were an intentional counterpoint to Dionysus's more raucous festivals, or simply a lesser-known tradition overshadowed by myth. Some say these tranquil soirees reflect the god's dual nature, the chaotic frenzy balanced by serene joy. Others suggest they were invented much later as Greeks sought to domesticate the wild edges of Dionysian worship. In mainstream ancient Greece, Dionysus was often celebrated with thiasoi, large boisterous processions, featuring masks, wild music, and intoxicated followers dancing under moonlight. But alongside this public spectacle existed an alternative form of honoring Dionysus' intimate garden parties held among the vines, where the emphasis was on conversation, shared stories, and the subtle appreciation of wine's pleasures. Picture a small group reclining on soft cushions, the scent of jasmine, mixing with fresh grape must. No loud drumming here, only the occasional pluck of a lyre or the gentle rustle of leaves. These parties likely took place in the courtyards of wealthy Athenians or secluded countryside villas, places where the boundaries between nature and human artistry blurred. One quirky tidbit. Some ancient texts hint that Dionysus personally favored these quiet celebrations because they allowed the god to mingle with mortals more intimately without the overwhelming frenzy his cult usually inspired. He could enjoy the complexity of human conversation, taste subtle wines, and appreciate the art of gardening, all in one serene setting. This love for the garden party aligns with Dionysus's identity as a god of fertility, growth, and transformation, not just through chaos, but through the slow, nurturing cycles of nature. It's a reminder that even gods known for wildness had moments of quiet reflection. As you imagine the party unfolding, you might wonder about the guests. Who were they? The famous satyrs and maenads who thrived on chaos were probably absent here. Instead, these gatherings attracted philosophers, poets, and occasional mystics drawn to the god's more contemplative side. Remember that delicate balance between wine-fueled revelry and thoughtful moderation. These garden parties represent Dionysus's subtle invitation to enjoy life's pleasures without losing yourself in them. So as you settle deeper into your pillow, feel the cool garden night wrap around you like a soft blanket. And know that the god of wine had a secret. Sometimes the best party is the quiet one. You step deeper into the mythic shadows surrounding Dionysus's origins, where the lines between mortal and divine blur like twilight merging with night. His birth story is one of the strangest in Greek mythology, a god born not from a straightforward union, but from a tangled web of passion, death, and rebirth. This strange birth shapes the god's complex nature, and by extension, his taste for those quiet garden parties where contrasts coexist peacefully. Picture this: Zeus, king of gods, falls in love with the mortal Semele, but Hera, his jealous wife, tricks Semele into demanding Zeus reveal his true divine form. When Zeus complies, the mortal Semele is incinerated by the sheer glory of his godly presence. But Zeus, ever resourceful, rescues the unborn Dionysus by sewing him into his thigh where the god gestates until ready to be born. This dual birth, once from the mortal woman, once from the god, gives Dionysus a foot in both worlds' mortal and immortal chaos and order, nature and civilization. Historians still argue whether this unusual birth tale symbolizes the god's liminal position, always on the edge between life and death, sanity and madness, wildness and calm, or if it was a poetic way to explain the sudden intoxication and transformation that wine brings. Either way, Dionysus's dual nature emerges here, a theme that echoes throughout his quiet garden parties. Unlike gods born in temples or grand halls, Dionysus is a god of the outdoors, born from the earth's wildness and nurtured in secret places. His identity was inseparable from nature's cycles, growing, dying, and rebirthing like the grapevine itself. That's why these garden parties were so meaningful. They weren't just social events. They were rituals reflecting his very essence. One quirky fringe idea comes from scholars who suggest that Dionysus's birth story might encode ancient agricultural rites where death and rebirth of crops were symbolized by the god's own resurrection. If that's true, then the garden parties become living ceremonies, celebrating fertility and renewal, with guests participating in a quiet homage to life's rhythms. At these gatherings, you'd notice how guests didn't just sip wine, they revered the vine itself, a symbol of Dionysus's power to transform grapes into something magical. They would speak softly about the mysteries of nature and existence, their conversations winding like the garden paths underfoot. Interestingly, some ancient texts describe how Dionysus taught mortals the art of viticulture, sharing his secret knowledge in whispers rather than grand proclamations. His quiet garden parties were the perfect setting for such exchanges. Small, intimate groups learning directly from the god himself. Think of the god's birth as a metaphor for transformation, just as the grape undergoes fermentation to become wine. Dionysus moves through realms of life and death, chaos and order, noise and quiet. His garden parties let mortals touch that mystery without losing their footing. So as you feel the cool air brush your skin and hear the faint buzz of insects settling for the night, remember the god who was born twice, who lived between worlds, and who invites you to sit with him in the calm heart of the garden. You follow the trail of Dionysus's evolving worship, where thunderous chaos slowly softens into calm reflection. Early on, his rites were anything but quiet. Think wild processions with frenzied followers, ecstatic dances, and loud music echoing through forests. But over time, something shifted. The god who once inspired uproarious madness began to host more subdued celebrations, inviting participants to explore a different kind of communion. One wrapped in silence, shared glances, and gentle gestures amid lush greenery. Historians still argue whether this evolution was a natural development or a deliberate attempt by Greeks to tame a god who could easily spiral out of control. Some believe that as Dionysian worship spread into the cities, the rowdy rites had to adapt to more structured, peaceful settings. Others suggest it reflects a duality inherent in Dionysus himself, the wild frenzy balanced by a quiet grace. Imagine the transformation from wild maenads tearing through the woods to thoughtful gatherings under vine-laced pergolas, where the emphasis was on connection rather than chaos. The Theasos. The traditional Dionysian entourage of revelers started including philosophers and poets who preferred dialogue over drunken shouting. This change wasn't instantaneous. Even in quiet garden parties, echoes of the earlier frenzy lingered, a sudden burst of laughter, a spirited toast, or a lively musical interlude. But the overall tone shifted toward moderation, a celebration of life's subtler pleasures. One quirky detail comes from vase paintings, showing Dionysian figures reclining peacefully, sharing wine and conversation surrounded by blooming flowers instead of wild animals. These images suggest the god's worship adapted visually, as well as culturally, embracing a softer aesthetic. By the classical period, Dionysus's worship had many faces. On one side were the noisy, ecstatic festivals like the Dionysia in Athens, full of drama and song. On the other were these intimate garden parties where silence was as important as sound and reflection as valued as excitement. This gradual shift also influenced how Dionysus was portrayed in art and literature, less as a wild, unpredictable force, and more as a god of transformation and renewal, capable of inspiring quiet joy and thoughtful contemplation. At these garden parties, the focus moved from losing oneself in frenzy to finding oneself in shared stillness. Guests would listen to poetry, enjoy delicate wines, and appreciate the intricate beauty of nature, all while wrapped in a calming atmosphere. Think of it as the god's gift of balance, the wild and the serene coexisting, reminding you that not all celebrations need to be loud to be memorable. So, as you lie back, feel the gentle hush of the garden around you, and savor this quieter side of Dionysus where calm and chaos live in perfect harmony. You slip quietly into the shadows to meet the secret guests of Dionysus's garden parties, those unexpected figures who added flavor and mystery to the evenings. Unlike the wild throngs of satyrs and maenads, you might picture from the noisy festivals these gatherings welcomed a peculiar mix of characters, minor deities, nymphs, philosophers, and even some forgotten mythic creatures who preferred a softer scene. It's like walking into a party where the usual party animals took a night off, and instead the quiet thinkers and dreamers took center stage. Historians still argue whether these guests were part of a long-standing tradition or a later invention by writers who wanted to soften Dionysus's image. But the presence of these figures adds a rich layer of intrigue, almost like an ancient version of your eclectic friend group, where everyone brings something unexpected to the table. One fascinating tidbit: the Seleni, often depicted as drunken companions of Dionysus, at these garden parties were said to be more contemplative sometimes, even acting as sages dispensing riddles and advice, rather than causing chaos. Imagine a tipsy professor dropping wisdom under the olive trees rather than stumbling through the underbrush. Nymphs, too, played a vital role. These minor nature spirits, guardians of trees and springs, fit perfectly into the garden's quiet ambiance. Their presence reminded guests that the party was as much about honoring nature's subtle beauty as it was about socializing. Philosophers and poets were regular attendees, drawn by the opportunity to engage in soft-spoken debates and storytelling. The god Dionysus was believed to inspire creativity not just through madness, but through the calm flow of ideas shared in the moonlit garden. These gatherings may have been some of the earliest salons where intellectual sparks flew as gently as the evening breeze. A quirky fringe idea from some scholars suggests that certain mythic outsiders, like the enigmatic figure of Ampelos, a youth loved by Dionysus who was transformed into a vine, were symbolic guests at these parties. Their stories woven into the fabric of the gathering added layers of meaning about transformation and loss, without the need for loud drama. These parties also attracted foreigners, travelers, and outsiders who brought different customs and perspectives. Their presence created a cosmopolitan vibe, blending local Greek traditions with far-off influences, all while maintaining the quiet intimacy of the garden setting. Imagine sitting among these guests, listening to the murmur of soft voices and the occasional whispered joke. It's a reminder that Dionysus's quieter celebrations were spaces for diverse friendships and unexpected conversations. So, as you let your mind wander among the shadows of olive branches and listen to the faint rustle of robes and laughter, picture these secret guests, each adding their own note to the gentle symphony of the night. You settle into the soft cushions of the garden, wine glass in hand, and find yourself drawn into the subtle art of conversation, a core ingredient at Dionysus's quiet parties. Unlike the loud, boisterous celebrations, you might expect these gatherings prized moderation, where sipping wine and sharing wisdom went hand in hand. The wine wasn't just a drink. It was a catalyst for gentle reflection and lively yet calm discussions that floated like the fragrance of blooming roses around you. Mainstream historical accounts tell us that wine held a sacred role in Greek culture, especially in Dionysian worship. The symposium, for instance, was a formal drinking party where moderate indulgence led to philosophical debates. At Dionysus's garden parties, this tradition blossomed in an even more intimate form. Here, guests weren't trying to get drunk. They were savoring the wine's subtlety and allowing it to loosen tongues without clouding minds. Historians still argue whether Dionysus was primarily a god of ecstatic frenzy or one who also represented a more measured enjoyment of life's pleasures. This duality shines brightest in these garden parties, where the mood swung gently between cheerfulness and contemplation. One quirky detail is that some attendees would bring special wines infused with herbs or flowers, like a whispered secret between the earth and the cup, adding delicate notes that mirrored the garden's sensory tapestry. Imagine tasting a wine lightly scented with lavender or thyme, the flavor mingling with the warm air and the quiet murmurs of the guests. Philosophers often use these occasions to discuss everything from ethics to the nature of the divine, weaving their ideas with the natural rhythms around them. The wine became a bridge between the physical and the intellectual, encouraging openness, without the chaos of typical drunken revelry. You might notice how laughter here was softer, more knowing, sometimes laced with gentle sarcasm, as stories unfolded and ideas bounced lightly like dappled sunlight through leaves. These gatherings encouraged a shared exploration of human experience, celebrating the fleeting joy found in connection. Interestingly, some ancient texts hint that Dionysus himself was believed to moderate the party's tone, ensuring the wine flowed just enough to inspire but not overwhelm. This protective role suggests a god deeply invested in balance rather than excess. So, as you imagine the wine warming your throat and the hum of quiet discussion around you, remember that Dionysus's garden parties were about savoring both the grape and the conversation, a delicate dance of mind and spirit, calm and delight. You sink deeper into the garden's embrace as soft lights flicker around you, lanterns hanging from olive branches casting a warm, dappled glow like fireflies caught in a gentle breeze. The art of ambiance at Dionysus's garden parties was as carefully crafted as the wines you sip. Every element, the layout of the garden, the choice of music, the delicate illumination worked together to create an atmosphere that invited calm comfort and a slow, dreamlike unfolding of the evening. Historians still argue whether the lighting and music were purely practical or had deeper ritual significance. Some scholars suggest the flickering lanterns symbolize the god's flickering presence between the mortal and divine realms, while others see them simply as mood setters for intimate conversation. Either way, the ambiance was key to shifting guests away from the chaos of daily life and into a more reflective space. Music at these parties wasn't the loud drumming cacophony of typical Dionysian rites. Instead, it was soft melodic harps, lyres, and flutes playing gentle tunes that blended with the sounds of rustling leaves and the distant call of nightbirds. The music's rhythm was slow, encouraging guests to breathe deeply and tune into the subtleties around them. One quirky historical note: some ancient accounts mention the use of silence music, a term that might sound like a contradiction, but refers to the thoughtful pauses and quiet moments between notes where the absence of sound was just as important as the melody itself. Imagine those pauses as brief sighs in the conversation, giving space for thoughts to settle and emotions to breathe. The garden itself was carefully arranged paths, winding through clusters of fragrant herbs and flowering shrubs, soft cushions placed strategically for comfort, and vine trellises providing dappled shade. These physical details weren't just decoration. They were part of the ritual, inviting guests to slow down and savor each moment. Soft scents played their part too. The perfume of blooming jasmine, ripe grapes, and crushed mint mingled in the air, engaging your senses without overwhelming. This olfactory backdrop was a subtle reminder of Dionysus's connection to nature's gifts and the transient beauty of life. Interestingly, some scholars speculate that the ambiance also helped regulate the party's emotional tone, preventing guests from slipping into excess by surrounding them with calm, sensory cues. It was a way to keep the balance between celebration and restraint. So as you close your eyes for a moment and let the soft music and flickering lights wash over you, feel the garden's gentle magic wrapping around you, inviting you to sink deeper into the night's quiet embrace. You lean in closer to the earth, feeling the soft pulse of life beneath your feet as you explore Dionysus's profound connection to gardening and plants. The quiet garden parties weren't just a backdrop, they were living extensions of the god's essence, celebrations of growth, fertility, and the slow, nurturing cycles of nature. Dionysus wasn't only the god of wine, he was also a guardian of vineyards, olive groves, and all things green and growing. Mainstream myth tells us that Dionysus introduced viticulture to humans, teaching them how to cultivate grapes and turn them into wine. This wasn't just about alcohol. It was about partnership with the earth, understanding its rhythms and respecting its bounty. The garden parties reflected this knowledge, intimately held amidst flourishing plants tended with care, symbolizing life's constant renewal. Historians still argue whether Dionysus's role as a plant god predates his reputation as a deity of wild revelry. Some evidence suggests that early worship focused on agricultural fertility before the god's more chaotic aspects took center stage. These garden parties might be echoes of those ancient agrarian rites, a quieter, more contemplative way to honor the earth's generosity. One quirky fact: some rituals involved offering newly sprouted vines to Dionysus, a symbolic gesture acknowledging his role as both creator and caretaker of life. Guests at the garden parties might gently touch leaves or sip from cups, adorned with vine motifs deepening their bond with nature's cycles. The plants themselves weren't just decorations, they were participants. Vines twisted around trellises like silent dancers. Olive trees stood sentinel, and herbs like rosemary and thyme filled the air with calming aromas. Each species carried symbolic meaning: fertility protection, healing, that added layers of quiet reverence to the gathering. Interestingly, some scholars highlight that these parties reflected a growing cultural appreciation for horticulture in ancient Greece, where gardening became a refined art rather than mere subsistence. Dionysus's garden parties celebrated this shift, blending divine inspiration with human craftsmanship. As you imagine your fingers brushing against the soft leaves and hear the faint rustle of plants stirred by a light breeze, feel how the god's presence lingers in the natural world. These gardens weren't just places for parties. They were sacred spaces where the divine touched the everyday. So, as you breathe in the mingling sense of earth and leaf, remember Dionysus not only as a wild reveler, but as a quiet gardener nurturing the seeds of life and connection beneath the stars. You find yourself drawn into a curious contest unfolding beneath the vine-covered pergola, a contest unlike any gladiator's fight or loud competition you might expect. At Dionysus's garden parties, games weren't about shouting or physical feats, but subtle, quiet challenges that teased the mind and tickled the spirit. Think of this as an ancient version of your favorite low-key game night, where riddles, wordplay, and clever puzzles kept everyone engaged without raising their voices. Historians still argue whether these contests were formalized events or more spontaneous entertainments. Some ancient texts describe friendly competitions of wit and storytelling, while others hint at ritualized games designed to honor the god's dual nature of chaos and order. One quirky detail from fringe mythology reveals a game involving whispered riddles passed from guest to guest, each riddle wrapped in layers of symbolism about nature, transformation, and the divine. Imagine the thrill of trying to solve a puzzle while the garden's night sounds provide a soft soundtrack, all under the watchful gaze of Dionysus himself. Another favorite was the silent toast, where guests would raise their cups in unspoken tribute, communicating messages or jokes through subtle glances and gestures. This game required sharp observation and a playful mind, encouraging connection without a single word. Music sometimes accompanied these contests, but it remained soft and unobtrusive, like a gentle tide supporting the flow of ideas. The challenge was to maintain a delicate balance, stimulating the mind while preserving the evening's calm mood. Interestingly, these subtle games may have had deeper symbolic meanings. Some scholars propose that they reflected the god's transformative powers, inviting guests to unravel mysteries just as wine transforms grapes, or to find order within apparent silence. As you imagine participating in such a contest, you sense the intimate camaraderie growing, fueled by shared curiosity and the joy of quiet connection. The garden's shadows and soft light create a cocoon for playful minds where even a whispered word can carry weight. So as the evening deepens and you lean in to catch a riddle's hint or return a secret smile, remember that at Dionysus's garden parties, the most thrilling battles were those fought with wit, subtlety, and the delicate art of quiet fun. You sit back on a plush cushion, the cool night air wrapping around you like a gentle whisper, and ponder the true temperament of Dionysus, a question that has long puzzled scholars and historians. Was he truly the wild, untamable god of madness and frenzy, or did he also embody a calmer, more serene spirit that thrived in these quiet garden parties? This duality lies at the heart of Dionysus's enduring mystery, inviting endless debate about who he really was beneath the grapevine. Mainstream history paints Dionysus as the quintessential god of chaos, wild, ecstatic, and unpredictable. Yet the very existence of these peaceful garden gatherings challenges that image, suggesting a more nuanced personality. Were these quiet parties a natural extension of his divine nature, or a later attempt by worshippers to domesticate a god who could otherwise wreak havoc? Historians still argue whether Dionysus's temperamental extremes represent two separate aspects or a single complex deity embracing contradictions. Some see him as a symbol of life's unpredictable rhythms, sometimes wild and unrestrained, sometimes calm and reflective. Others believe the quiet side was an innovation by later Greeks aiming to fit Dionysus into a more civilized framework. One quirky fact: ancient vase paintings and texts sometimes show Dionysus holding a thyrsus, a staff topped with ivy, calmly reclining among guests, rather than leading frenzied dances. This imagery supports the idea that even in myth, the god's demeanor wasn't always tempestuous. Some scholars also suggest that Dionysus's temperament might have changed depending on the context and audience. In public festivals, the god's chaotic side dominated, while in private garden parties, his quieter, more nurturing qualities came forward. This ongoing debate mirrors the tension between noise and silence at the parties themselves. Guests would shift effortlessly from spirited to serene, mirroring the god's own oscillations. Imagine how this dual nature might feel, like the wind shifting suddenly from a playful breeze to a fierce gust, keeping everyone slightly off balance but deeply connected to life's unpredictable flow. So, as you let the garden's calm settle around you, consider Dionysus as both the wild flame and the gentle ember, a god who embraced chaos and quiet in equal measure. You feel the subtle shift in the garden as the seasons whisper their influence over the party's rhythm. Spring's tender blossoms giving way to summer's lush fullness, then autumn's golden decay. Dionysus's quiet garden parties weren't fixed in one moment. They danced along with nature's changing moods. The landscapes and seasons shaped how these gatherings unfolded, blending human celebration with the Earth's eternal cycles. Mainstream history tells us that many Dionysian festivals were tied closely to agricultural calendars, marking moments of planting growth and harvest. The garden parties mirrored this connection, offering a more intimate way to honor these natural transitions. Guests would sip young wines in spring, revel in the richness of the harvest in autumn, and retreat into reflection during winter's quiet. Historians still argue how deeply seasonal changes influence the form and mood of these parties. Some scholars emphasize the symbolic weight of each season, suggesting the parties were living metaphors for life cycles. Others view the seasonal setting as a practical backdrop chosen simply because the garden was most inviting during certain times of the year. One quirky detail: certain flowers and plants used in decorations corresponded with specific seasons: spring's hyacinths and daisies, summer's roses and lilies, autumn's chrysanthemums. These choices weren't just aesthetic, but carried symbolic meanings about renewal, passion, and farewell. The weather also played a role. Gentle breezes rustled leaves to accompany soft music, while the cooling evening air invited longer, more lingering conversations. Stormy skies were rare guests, and when they appeared, they brought a dramatic pause to the festivities, a reminder of nature's unpredictable power. Interestingly, some accounts suggest that guests wore clothing and accessories, reflecting the season-light flowing garments in summer, warmer earth-toned wraps in autumn, adding to the immersive sensory experience. As you imagine the garden evolving through the year, you feel the deep connection between the party and the living world around it. The quiet celebrations weren't just social events. They were part of nature's grand narrative. So, as you let the cool night breeze brush your skin and watch the stars wheel overhead, remember that Dionysus's garden parties moved with the season's soft echoes of the Earth's timeless dance. You notice the flicker of shadows as masks come into view, softly worn, not to terrify or conceal wild madness, but to invite mystery and gentle playfulness. At Dionysus's quiet garden parties, masks were less about frenzy and more about subtle transformation, allowing guests to step into different roles without the need for loud declarations. It's like slipping on a delicate disguise to reveal a quieter truth, a secret smile shared beneath the moonlight. Mainstream history tells us masks were common in Dionysian festivals, often linked to theatrical performances and ecstatic rites. But in the garden parties, their role shifted from wild expression to nuanced social interaction. Guests could become poets, philosophers, or nature spirits exploring identity through soft symbolism rather than uproar. Historians still argue whether these masks served primarily ritual purposes or were more social devices to encourage openness and intimacy. Some suggest masks helped break down barriers, allowing guests to speak more freely, while others see them as a way to honor the gods' liminal nature existing between the visible and invisible, known and unknown. A quirky tidbit: masks at these gatherings were often crafted from natural materials, delicate leaves, woven reeds, or painted clay blending seamlessly with the garden's organic surroundings. Imagine a mask shimmering faintly with dewdrops or vines, curling gently along its edges. The anonymity masks provided wasn't about hiding identity, but about exploring the fluidity of self. An ancient way to say, "Tonight I am more than who I seem." This subtle playfulness fostered a safe space for quiet rebellion, where social norms could be gently challenged without clamor. Interestingly, some masks bore symbols linked to fertility, transformation, or protection, echoing themes central to Dionysus's mythology and the garden's symbolism. Wearing such a mask connected the wearer to deeper stories woven into the night. So, as you imagine slipping on a soft, leafy mask and exchanging knowing glances with other guests, feel the thrill of quiet mystery and the gentle freedom that comes with becoming someone or something else just for a while. You lean toward the low table where small plates are laid out like delicate treasures. No grand feast here, just carefully crafted bites that mirror the garden's quiet elegance. At Dionysus's garden parties, the culinary delights were as subtle and refined as the conversations and music designed to enhance the experience without overwhelming the senses. Imagine nibbling on honeyed figs, tender olives, and soft cheeses paired with freshly baked bread, all chosen to complement the nuanced flavors of the garden's wines. Mainstream historical accounts tell us that ancient Greek feasts could be extravagant and loud affairs, but these intimate gatherings favored moderation and quality over quantity. The food was meant to nourish the body gently, while leaving plenty of room for thoughtful conversation and wine appreciation. Historians still argue about how much variety these menus included. Some suggest that the parties featured seasonal, locally sourced produce reflecting Dionysus's connection to the Earth's cycles. Others propose that the simplicity was intentional, a way to keep focus on the ritual and social interaction, rather than indulgence. A quirky fact: some texts mention the use of herbs like mint and rosemary, not only for flavor, but for their calming effects, subtly aiding the party's tranquil mood. Imagine the faint coolness of crushed mint leaves on your tongue, mingling with the sweetness of the wine. The presentation of food was also part of the experience, small portions artfully arranged on rustic pottery plates, encouraging guests to savor each bite slowly. This mindful eating was almost a ritual in itself, honoring the earth's gifts and the god who nurtured them. Interestingly, some scholars highlight that these culinary choices reflected a broader Greek cultural value of sophrosyne, moderation, and self-control qualities that aligned well with the quieter Dionysian celebrations. As you imagine tasting these delicate flavors, feeling the textures and aromas mingle softly with the garden's scents, you sense how food and drink work together to create a full sensory tapestry. A feast for body and soul without the boisterous distractions of larger festivals. So as you pick up a slice of fig, savoring its honeyed sweetness, remember Dionysus's garden parties as places where subtlety reigned supreme, and every element from wine to food to conversation was part of a carefully balanced celebration. You notice new faces, arriving travelers and strangers, weaving gently into the circle of guests. Dionysus's garden parties weren't closed societies. They welcomed outsiders with open arms, inviting a quiet exchange of stories, customs, and wines from distant lands. This blending of cultures added layers of richness to the gatherings, making them not just local retreats but crossroads of ancient worldliness. Mainstream history tells us that Greek festivals often had elements of hospitality, but Dionysus's celebrations took this to a unique level. His myth itself includes journeys and encounters with foreign lands and peoples. The garden parties reflected this spirit of openness, where the unfamiliar wasn't feared but embraced. Historians still argue about how integrated foreigners truly were in these rites. Some evidence suggests they were honored guests bringing exotic wines and tales from beyond Greece's borders. Others think their presence was more symbolic, representing the god's reach across cultures. One quirky detail: some guests might have brought unusual wines infused with spices or fruits, unknown to Greeks, sparking whispered curiosity and the occasional quiet debate about taste and tradition. Imagine sipping a wine flavored with pomegranate seeds or wild mountain herbs, a subtle challenge to your palate. The inclusion of outsiders also symbolized a breaking down of social and cultural barriers, an invitation to experience Dionysus's transformative power not just personally but collectively. It was a gentle reminder that the god's domain extended beyond the familiar. Interestingly, these gatherings could have been early incubators of cosmopolitan thought, where the mingling of perspectives fostered new ideas about identity and belonging. As you listen to a foreign guest recount a story of distant vineyards and unusual harvests, you feel the garden's quiet hum grow richer, a tapestry woven from many threads. So as you sip your wine and exchange a knowing glance with a new friend from afar, remember these garden parties as spaces where the world's edges softly blurred and difference became a source of gentle celebration. You lean in, catching whispers of quiet rebellion bubbling beneath the surface of these serene gatherings. Dionysus's garden parties weren't just peaceful retreats. They were subtle acts of defiance, gently challenging social norms without raising a single voice. Here in the soft glow of lantern light, guests tested boundaries and explored new freedoms wrapped in the guise of calm celebration. Mainstream history shows Dionysus as a god who often turned the established order upside down with his wild festivals, allowing people, especially marginalized groups like women and slaves, to step outside societal roles. But at these garden parties, rebellion took on a quieter, more sophisticated form. Historians still argue about how overt these challenges were. Some suggest the parties allowed for coded expressions of dissent through masked identities, whispered conversations, or symbolic gestures. Others see them as safe spaces where social hierarchies were gently questioned without disrupting public order. One quirky tidbit: scholars have noted that some garden party rituals involved role reversals and playful mimicry, letting guests slip into personas that defied their everyday status. Imagine a noblewoman and a servant exchanging stories as equals under the cover of anonymity. The masks and riddles we talked about earlier played into this, creating layers of meaning and allowing participants to express forbidden ideas subtly. These quiet rebellions weren't loud protests, but delicate dances around the edges of convention. Interestingly, the garden itself symbolized this liminality, a space neither fully public nor private, where rules could be bent and new possibilities imagined. The party's very setting fostered a sense of suspended reality, perfect for exploring identity and power softly. As you imagine these whispered revolutions unfolding amid soft laughter and shared glances, you sense the thrill of challenging the world without a shout. A rebellion carried in smiles and silences. So as you breathe in the night air scented with rosemary and freedom, remember that Dionysus's quiet garden parties were not just about calm. They were about gently shaking the foundations beneath your feet. You watch the garden party draw to a close, the soft murmurs fading into the gentle rustle of leaves, and realize this quieter side of Dionysus still lives on. These intimate gatherings, steeped in nature's rhythms and subtle celebrations, echo through time, influencing how we seek calm connection and transformation even today. The legacy of Dionysus's garden parties reminds us that joy need not be loud to be profound. Mainstream culture often remembers Dionysus as the wild reveler, but the tradition of his tranquil parties survives in peaceful rituals. Small gatherings under the stars, slow sips of wine, and conversations that linger like soft melodies. These are the echoes of a god who valued both chaos and calm, teaching us to find balance. Historians still debate how much these quiet traditions shaped later cultural practices, but it's clear that the spirit of Dionysus endures in moments of gentle togetherness. From secret garden clubs to modern wine tastings, the essence of his subtle parties permeates our collective consciousness. A quirky tidbit: some contemporary festivals and spiritual gatherings consciously revive Dionysian themes, favoring mindfulness and intimacy over boisterous celebration. Imagine a night where candles flicker, music hums quietly, and people share stories with a knowing smile. A modern garden party in spirit, if not in name. The lessons of these ancient parties remind us to honor nature's cycles, cherish our connections, and embrace transformation without losing ourselves. They offer a blueprint for celebrating life's complexities with grace and quiet joy. As you feel the night deepen around you, the garden's scents softening, and stars twinkling more faintly, let the peace of Dionysus's garden party settle into your bones. This is a moment to carry with you a gentle reminder that sometimes the most sacred celebrations are those held in silence. So, as you drift towards sleep, let the memory of vines, whispers, and soft laughter cradle you into dreams filled with calm and wonder. As the garden's gentle night wraps around you like a soft woven shawl, feel the last traces of conversation melt into the quiet hum of nature settling down. The flicker of lantern light fades slowly, leaving only the stars above to witness the end of this tranquil gathering. There is no rush here, no need to hurry, just the steady, calming rhythm of breath and the soothing whisper of leaves in the evening breeze. Remember how Dionysus, the god known for both wild frenzy and tender growth, invited you into his quieter world where every sip of wine was a small celebration, every glance a shared secret, and every silence a space for reflection. This is a world where joy isn't loud or overwhelming, but soft and sustained like the slow unfolding of a flower or the gentle sway of vines in the wind. As you feel your body relax deeper, imagine the scent of jasmine and thyme lingering in the air, grounding you in the moment while gently easing your mind away from the day's worries. Let the memory of quiet laughter and whispered riddles drift like petals on a slow-moving stream, carrying you softly towards sleep. You are safe here in this garden of calm, where transformation happens not in chaos, but in quiet moments of connection and peace. The legacy of Dionysus's garden parties is a reminder that sometimes the most profound magic happens in stillness. So take a deep breath. Let your eyelids grow heavy and float away on the gentle current of the night. Sweet dreams await you in this serene place where the god of wine hosts his softest, most enduring celebration.